Welcome to a one-story teller, the home of powerful soul, stirring stories that shine a light where others prefer shadows. We don't just tell stories, we reveal truths. We take you deep into the lives of the underestimated, the overlooked, and the bold souls who stood tall in the face of injustice. Today's story is one for the ages. It's about how a single act of racism on an ordinary morning turned into a corporate earthquake that shook the airline industry to its core. It's about a woman, a visionary, a warrior, a force of nature, who wasn't just traveling from one coast to another. She was on a mission to change lives until one man, wearing a badge and harboring a bias, tried to humiliate her, but he didn't know who he was dealing with. This isn't just a story about racism or revenge. It's a story about reclaiming power, demanding respect, and using influence not to punish, but to transform. And by the time you hear how Dr. Amina Daniels responded, you'll realize this wasn't a moment. It was a movement, so grab your headphones, turn the volume up, and prepare to be inspired, outraged, and absolutely floored, because a one-story teller is about to take off, and you're in for the ride of your life. It was 6:32 a.m. at JFK International Airport. The morning rush was in full swing with sleep. Deprived travelers hustling through security lines, juggling carry, ons, neck pillows, and triple shot espressos. Gate 22 in Terminal 4 was relatively calm, just another typical weekday in America's busiest airport. Amid the sea of joggers and business suits, one figure stood out, not because she was loud or flashy, but because she carried herself with a kind of calm authority that made people glance twice. That woman was Dr. Amina Daniels. At 36 years old, Amina had already achieved more than most could dream of in a lifetime. She held 2 doctorates, one in global economics from Oxford and one in international law from Columbia. She was the founder and CEO of Empower Her International, a philanthropic investment organization managing billions in funding for women of color across the globe. She'd spoken at the United Nations, advised presidents, and signed deals with Fortune 100 companies, all while maintaining a down-to-earth humility that left even her fiercest critics disarmed. Today, she wasn't traveling to make headlines. She had a quiet mission, a historic deal in Los Angeles that would secure $4 billion in capital to fund FEMA, led tech startups and infrastructure programs across Africa, the Caribbean, and the American South. It was the culmination of 5 years of lobbying, fundraising, and negotiations. Dressed in a tailored black pantsuit and red bottom heels, her sleek locks pinned into a neat bun, Amina stood at the gate, quietly reviewing her notes on a rose gold iPad. She didn't sit in the lounge, she didn't ask for special treatment, she didn't flaunt her wealth. She was just another black woman minding her business. First-class passengers now boarding, the gate agent announced. She smiled politely, scanned her boarding pass, and stepped onto the jet bridge. The flight attendant at the aircraft door greeted her with a cheerful "Good morning, Dr. Daniels, welcome aboard." Amina gave a soft nod and stepped into the aircraft cabin. Her seat was 2A window seat, first row. She stowed her leather briefcase overhead, placed her iPad into the seat pocket, and eased into the plush first-class chair. She sipped a glass of water and reviewed her keynote slides for the LA summit. The cabin began to fill. White men in suits, a middle-aged couple whispering about wine country, a young entrepreneur snapping selfies, the usual suspects. That's when Amina noticed her presence was being noticed. One woman, seated in 1C, kept turning her head, her brows furrowed. A flight attendant hovered by the curtain, looking between Amina and a tablet. It was subtle, but Amina had seen this before. The small, quiet questioning of black excellence, the unspoken suspicion, how did she get here, who let her in? She ignored it, but the moment wouldn't ignore her. 23 minutes after Amina boarded, and just as the final passengers were settling into their seats, there was a commotion at the aircraft door. "Excuse me, sir, you can't just barge in like, I have authorization," barked a gruff male voice. "Stand aside." It was Officer Rick Holloway, a Port Authority cop who had made a name for himself by being aggressive, quick to judge, and unapologetically arrogant. Rick was 44 years old, 5 years from retirement, and had a chip on his shoulder the size of Queen's. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his sunglasses perched on his head, and his hand rested loosely on the butt of his taser as he marched into the aircraft. Passengers turned their heads. The captain opened the cockpit door with a confused look. Rick ignored everyone. He walked straight down the aisle toward first class, his boots loud against the carpet. Then, without a greeting, a question, or a word of explanation, he pointed directly at Amina Daniels. "You stand up." The entire cabin froze. Amina looked up, puzzled. "Excuse me, you heard me. Stand up. Let's go." Her brow furrowed. "Is there a problem?" "Yeah, you." He snapped. "We received a report of a suspicious passenger. You're coming with me." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. "S suspicious. She's been sitting here reviewing slides," whispered a man in 2C. "She hasn't moved." Another passenger chimed in. Rick wasn't listening. He grabbed Amina's arm, not hard, but firm enough to humiliate, and motioned for her to bring her bag. Amina stiffened. "Take your hand off me." Rick leaned in. "You're gonna make this hard." "I'm going to make this legal," she replied coldly. "Tell me your name and badge number." That's when Rick saw it. Not fear in her eyes, but power. And it made him furious. "Out, now, don't make me escalate this." He snapped, tugging her toward the jet bridge. A hush fell over the entire aircraft. Some passengers looked away, others pulled out their phones. One woman in 3A began recording. Amina stood up, slowly, with grace. She picked up her bag, fixed her collar, and turned to face the cabin. "I'll go," she said, "but this man just made a mistake he'll never forget." Rick scoffed. "That's what they all say." As they disappeared into the jet bridge, a murmur of disbelief swept through the passengers. Some stared at their shoes, others stared at their phones, and one woman kept filming, because something about this didn't feel right. It didn't feel right at all. Amina Daniels stood alone in the sterile corridor of JFK Security Wing, a Port Authority badge glinting under the white fluorescence as Officer Rick Holloway smirked and shuffled paperwork behind the desk. Her wrists weren't cuffed, but the humiliation stung worse than restraints ever could. No phone, no voice, no freedom, all for what? Sitting in first class while black. Rick, leaning against the doorframe, finally spoke. "So, Miss Daniels, Dr. Daniels." She interrupted firmly, eyes burning into him. He blinked. "Right. Doctor, we got an anonymous tip you were flying under a false identity. Forged documents. It's routine." She raised an eyebrow. "Routine? I've taken over 200 flights in the last 5 years and never once been randomly pulled off a plane moments before takeoff. Was the tip that I was black and successful, or just that I was breathing in first class?" Rick chuckled, clearly uncomfortable. "Don't play the race card with me. Don't play stupid with me," Amina snapped. "My passport, boarding pass, and federal clearance are valid. I have global entry TSA pre-check, and I've been awarded by the State Department and the UN. So if you'd like to continue this farce, I suggest you call a lawyer, because the moment I walk out of here, it's not going to be routine anymore." That made Rick pause. She was too calm, too prepared. Something about her wasn't adding up, or rather, it was adding up to far more than he was prepared to handle. Then came the knock. A younger officer, nervous and breathless, entered the room and whispered something into Rick's ear. His face blanched. He looked at Amina, then at the computer, then back at Amina. "You're Dr. Amina Daniels of Empower Her?" he asked, suddenly sweating. "Yes, the same Dr. Daniels whose organization is about to finalize a $4 billion investment deal with 10 Fortune 500 companies, including Western Skies Airlines, the one whose plane you just pulled me off of." Rick's heart nearly stopped. She continued, her voice sharp as steel, "And as of now, I'm reconsidering all of those partnerships. Your department just jeopardized a deal that could uplift thousands of women, all because you couldn't fathom a black woman flying first class without committing a crime." Rick's mouth opened. Closed, he looked around for help, but the room had gone still. "Release me," Amina said. "Now." Within minutes, she had her belongings and a quiet apology from a red-faced security manager, but apologies wouldn't undo the damage. She walked back toward the terminal, not to board the plane, but to make a call. It rang once. Clarice, she said calmly, pull the files, cancel the agreement with Western Skies, and contact the press. We're going public. The media storm hit like a thunderclap the next morning. The first headline read, Black CEO pulled off plane by police, moments before she was set to sign $4 billion deal with airline. Then came the videos, recorded by passengers in the first-class cabin, showing Rick dragging Amina off the plane with no explanation. Then came the think pieces, the op-eds, and the Twitter firestorm. Within 48 hours, #I stand with Dr. Daniels was trending worldwide. Western Skies Airlines released a boilerplate statement. We take all reports of suspicious activity seriously and deeply regret any inconvenience. Amina wasn't having it. In a press conference held in downtown Manhattan, she stood tall at the podium, flanked by women executives, lawyers, and activists from across the country. Inconvenience, she said. This isn't about inconvenience. This is about systemic, baked-in bias, where a black woman in first class becomes a suspect before she becomes a passenger, where success is met with suspicion, where a uniform is used to humiliate rather than protect. Reporters shouted questions. Dr. Daniels, are you suing the airline? I'm not interested in lawsuits. She answered coolly. I'm interested in accountability. Effective immediately, Empower Her is suspending all travel partnerships, advertising agreements, and investment talks with Western Skies and their subsidiaries. That's nearly $4 billion in funding they will no longer have access to. Gasps. And she continued, we are reallocating those funds to minority-owned airlines and global mobility tech companies founded by women of color. The future of flight should be equitable, and we're going to build it ourselves. The room exploded in applause. Behind the scenes, Western Skies executives scrambled, their stock took a nosedive, board members panicked, shareholders demanded answers, but it was too late. The world had already seen the video, seen the arrogance. Seen the truth. Rick Holloway, he was suspended within a week. An internal investigation was launched, and though he tried to justify his actions, it became painfully clear he didn't act on a report. He acted on a belief, a dangerous one. Amina didn't stop there. She announced a new initiative, FLY Free, a global travel fund aimed at subsidizing flight costs for young women of color pursuing education and business opportunities abroad. Within a month, donations had reached $200 million. She had taken a moment of degradation and turned it into a revolution. 2 weeks after the press conference, Amina Daniels sat in the penthouse boardroom of Empower, her global headquarters in New York City. Behind her, the skyline gleamed like steel ambition. Before her sat a dozen CEOs, black women, Latina women, Asian women, founders of tech startups, logistics firms, and private charter jet services. All of them had one thing in common. They had faced systemic bias and turned it into fuel for something greater. Let's build what they never gave us, Amina said, her voice cutting through the air like a commandment. It wasn't a meeting, it was a movement. Empower Her had diverted all of its Western Skies funds, nearly $4 billion, into an unprecedented initiative called Air Equity, a coalition of minority-owned aviation companies committed to transforming how people of color travel. Charter companies, ride share to airport startups, and sustainable regional air carriers were all part of the plan. One CEO, a Nigerian, born woman named Temi Adesina, leaned forward. We've had to scrap for funding for years. They told us aviation wasn't for us. Now look, we're about to disrupt $1 billion industry. Another, a Latina tech entrepreneur named Marisol Vega, nodded. We have the infrastructure, the logistics, and now we have the money. We just needed someone to bet on us. Amina smiled. We're done asking for a seat at the table. We're building our own airspace. Meanwhile, the fallout for Western Skies Airlines continued to mount. Protesters marched in front of their terminals nationwide. The company's CEO released a series of increasingly desperate PR statements, apologizing, backpedaling, and begging for meetings, but Amina didn't respond. Why would she? They hadn't just lost $4 billion, they'd lost the public's trust, and Amina Daniels had become a symbol, not just of resilience, but of transformation. The impact stretched far beyond airports. At an elementary school in Atlanta, a 10-year-old black girl named Jayla clutched a model airplane she built for her STEM class and told her teacher, "I want to be like Dr. Daniels when I grow up. I want to fly higher than anyone ever has." A video of that moment went viral, racking up millions of views. Amina saw it and cried. This wasn't just her fight anymore, it was everyone's. It wasn't long before Washington came calling. Senator Diane Keller, chair of the Transportation Oversight Committee, invited Amina to testify before Congress in a public hearing on systemic racism in air travel. It was set to be televised nationally. The morning of the hearing, the Capitol buzzed with energy. Protesters gathered outside with signs that read "Black Passengers Matter" and "Justice at 30,000 feet." Reporters lined the marble hallways. Inside, Amina walked confidently into the hearing chamber, wearing a bold cobalt suit and heels that clicked like punctuation marks. Cameras flashed, eyes followed. Senator Keller opened the session. "Dr. Daniels, thank you for being here. Please share your experience." Amina adjusted the microphone and leaned in. 2 months ago, she began, I was dragged off a plane, not because I posed a threat, not because I had broken any law, but because someone decided I didn't look like I belonged in first class. She let the silence hang for a moment. That moment cost Western Skies Airlines billions, but more importantly, it exposed a truth that millions of travelers already knew: airports are not safe spaces for everyone. Flying while black, brown, Muslim, trans, poor, it comes with a level of scrutiny that our white counterparts simply don't face. Senator Keller nodded solemnly. "And what would you like to see change?" Amina looked directly at the senators. "I want federal training mandates for airline staff and security personnel. I want clear protocols that prevent profiling under the excuse of anonymous tips. I want real consequences, and most of all, I want the FAA to implement a passenger Bill of Rights that includes protection against racial discrimination." The crowd behind her erupted in applause. A security officer hushed them, but the message was already clear. This wasn't just testimony, this was history. One senator tried to question her authority. "Dr. Daniels, with all due respect, isn't this just an isolated incident blown out of proportion?" She didn't flinch. "No, Senator, what happened to me is the tip of the iceberg, and the only reason you're hearing about it is because I had power. But what about the thousands who don't? The working mothers, the college students, the single dads, the immigrants? I'm here because I refuse to let silence bury another story." That quote would end up in every newspaper the next morning. By week's end, 3 more women came forward with similar stories. Pulled off planes, interrogated, profiled, and those were just the ones who spoke up. Amina's presence had cracked something open. This was no longer about one flight. It was about an entire system. The world now knew who Amina Daniels was, but she hadn't forgotten the moment it all began. The fear in her chest, the heat of the hand that gripped her arm, the judgment in the eyes of the passengers who just watched. One of those passengers was now speaking up. His name was Malik Johnson, a 13-year-old from Detroit. He had been sitting in row 4C, headphones on, watching a Marvel movie when the confrontation started. He froze as he watched the officers approach Dr. Daniels and yank her up. Weeks later, his mother found him researching Amina on her laptop. She asked what he was doing, and Malik, holding back tears, said, "She looked just like you, Mom, and they did that to her in front of everyone." With her permission, Malik wrote a letter to Amina and posted it online. "Dear Dr. Daniels, I was on that plane. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know how. I'm sorry I didn't help. You looked so brave. You made me believe I can be brave too. When I grow up, I want to fly planes, not be afraid of them." Amina saw the letter late at night after a long meeting. She stared at the screen, tears falling quietly down her cheeks. It wasn't sadness, it was purpose. She didn't need millions to validate what she'd done. She just needed this one letter. She invited Malik and his mother to New York for the opening of the new Empower Her Aviation Scholarship program. During the ceremony, with cameras rolling and the media watching, she called Malik to the stage. "In front of the world," she said, placing her hand on his shoulder, "you're going to make your first public speech." The boy trembled. "What do I say?" "Just speak your truth." And he did. "I used to be scared to fly." He said into the mic, "But Dr. Daniels showed me that being strong doesn't mean being silent. I'm proud to be black. I'm proud to fly." The crowd gave him a standing ovation. One journalist tweeted, "A 13-year-old boy just reminded America what courage really looks like." Amina leaned down and whispered in his ear, "You just earned your wings." That day, Malik became the first recipient of the Dr. Amina Daniels Young Aviators Scholarship, a full ride to any aviation school of his choice when he turned 18. The story went viral again. This wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a movement taking flight. Back in Atlanta, the mood inside Western Skies Airlines executive headquarters was apocalyptic. The airline had lost over $8 billion in partnerships, and their stock had dropped 46% in 30 days. Thousands of negative reviews were flooding in from passengers boycotting their flights. Even their international partners were pulling out. CEO Douglas Warwick, a corporate lifer with a reputation for avoiding accountability, called an emergency board meeting. He paced in front of his boardroom, his tailored suit unable to hide the panic in his voice. "We have to do something to stop this bleeding," he snapped. One board member replied, "What we should have done weeks ago: apologize directly to Dr. Daniels and accept her reform proposals." Warwick scoffed. "She doesn't run aviation." "No," another woman replied, "but she's running the conversation." Backed into a corner, Warwick authorized a televised apology. A studio was set up. Lighting, script, PR team, it was all rehearsed. But when the red light came on, Warwick did something unexpected. He went off script. To Dr. Amina Daniels, he said, looking into the camera with pained eyes, "And to every passenger we failed. We were wrong, not just in how we treated you, but in the culture we've allowed to grow unchecked." He paused, breath shaky. "This has been the most painful and humbling moment of my career. But I'm here now to say this. We are going to meet with Dr. Daniels. We are going to rebuild our protocols, and I am personally stepping down as CEO effective immediately." Gasps echoed around the studio. Reporters scrambled. Twitter exploded. It wasn't performative anymore. This was real. The next day, Western Skies reached out formally to Amina with a letter signed by the entire board, requesting a closed-door meeting to discuss implementing her passenger protection initiative nationwide. Amina read the letter, then slowly folded it. She looked at her assistant. "Tell them I'll meet, but only if they agree to have 3 racial justice organizations in the room, and I want it recorded for public transparency." The assistant nodded. This time she was in control. 3 weeks after the CEO resignation and public apology, Amina Daniels stepped onto a private jet, not for a vacation, but for a purpose. This wasn't just any jet. It was Empower Her Flight 001, the inaugural flight of the newly launched Air Equity Alliance, carrying activists, entrepreneurs, and change makers from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. The flight was symbolic, and the world was watching. News outlets called it the freedom flight of the skies. As Amina boarded, she passed by young black pilots, all graduates of Empower Her's aviation mentorship programs. One of them, Captain Denise Carter, smiled wide as she shook her hand. "I never thought I'd be in this seat," Denise said. Amina replied, "Neither did I. But here we are rewriting the rules." As the plane taxied, Amina looked out the window, reflecting on how much had changed in just a few weeks. From being dragged off a plane to launching a flight of liberation, from a moment of humiliation to a movement of transformation, mid-flight, the intercom clicked. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Carter announced, "welcome aboard the future. This flight is dedicated to every person who has ever been told they don't belong. Today, we fly not just with wings, but with purpose." The passengers erupted in applause. Some cried, some clapped, some simply closed their eyes and exhaled. Finally breathing freely, Amina moved to the front of the plane to give a short speech. She took the mic and said, "Let this be the first of many. Let this flight remind us that access, dignity, and respect are not luxuries. They are rights. Rights we are now reclaiming at 30 feet and beyond." By the time they landed, the hashtag #FlyWithAmina had trended across all platforms. CNN aired the speech live. Social media lit up with support from celebrities, civil rights leaders, and ordinary travelers across the world. A Twitter post from Oprah Reed, "She was pulled down, but she rose. Dr. Amina Daniels is showing us all how to fly." Months passed. Investigations were launched, legislation was drafted. The Passenger Civil Rights Act, inspired directly by Amina's experience, was introduced in Congress with bipartisan support. It proposed a new federally protected clause, discrimination, free travel. It was an uphill battle, but momentum was on their side. Meanwhile, the police officer who had removed Amina from the flight that day, Officer Riley, had been placed on leave pending a full inquiry. But the nation demanded more than a timeout. Amina received a private letter from Riley weeks later. It was handwritten. "Dr. Daniels, I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve it. I only hope to understand what I participated in. I saw you as a threat when I should have seen you as a person. I've enrolled in anti-bias training and stepped down from air marshal duty. You changed how I see the world." Amina stared at the letter for a long time. She didn't know if it was sincere, but it no longer mattered if he learned. What mattered was that others would never have to experience what she did. And now, it was time to put the final exclamation mark on her mission. Western Skies Airlines, desperate to repair its image, agreed to fund a $100 million diversity and equity initiative within the aviation industry, but only after public pressure mounted beyond resistance. And as part of that initiative, they renamed a major concourse at Atlanta International Airport the Dr. Amina Daniels Concourse for Equity in Aviation. At the opening ceremony, thousands gathered, cameras flashed. Music played. Malik, the boy from 4C, was in the front row with his mom, holding a toy plane with her name painted on it. Amina stepped to the podium. "We're not here because I was pulled off a plane," she said. "We're here because a system tried to tell me I didn't belong, and I proved that I do, that we all do." Thunderous applause. This isn't just a concourse. It's a gateway for every black woman who's been underestimated, for every immigrant who's been scrutinized, for every child told to stay quiet. This space says, your journey matters, your destination matters. She paused, looking up at the large mural behind her, her own image, wings outstretched, surrounded by clouds and faces of passengers past and future. This is our sky now. And with that, Amina turned and walked down the concourse, hand in hand with Malik, as the world watched a woman once pulled down take flight, forever etched in history. And that, dear viewers, was the extraordinary true story of a woman who turned injustice into impact and humiliation into historic change. From being dragged off a plane to having an airport named after her doctor. Amina Daniels didn't just fight back. She lifted all of us with her. This is more than a story. It's a movement, a call to action, a reminder that we are not passengers on this journey. We are the pilots. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or opened your eyes, don't scroll past. Subscribe to a One Storyteller for more powerful stories that expose truth, uplift courage, and celebrate real people making real change. Drop a comment below. What would you have done on that plane, and how far are you willing to go for justice?